What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 4 of Nights and Weekends with JD Wesley. Today, we're going to talk about the New England Patriots, whose organization is in disarray after a 1-4 start to the 2023 NFL season. There's a lot of talk that things are as bad as they've been since the days before Tom Brady, but it's actually worse than that. This is as bad as things have been since the pre-Drew Bledsoe days, a quarterback they drafted first overall in the 1993 draft after a 2-14 season. And with the way things are headed, the Patriots may find themselves at the top of the draft again after this year. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start with where they are currently and how they've gotten there. In the last 2 weeks, the team has been outscored by a combined 72-3. It started with a Week 4 loss at Dallas, 38-3, and they followed it up with a dismal performance at home, losing 34-0 to the New Orleans Saints. In both games, Mac Jones threw 2 interceptions, including a pick 6 in each game, and fumbled twice. When you go back even further, the week before against the New York Jets, they only had 1 touchdown. That gives them a combined 1 touchdown across the last 3 weeks. And the offensive struggles don't stop there. They've only scored a combined 55 points across 5 games this season. Additionally, the defense is starting to show cracks as they now have a negative 76 point differential on the season. And all of this leads me to 3 takeaways. Number 1 is that this is primarily on Bill Belichick. Number 2 is that Mac Jones is not the guy for this franchise going forward. And number 3 is that it's really time to start thinking about next season. So let's hit these one by one. First, this is primarily on Bill Belichick. And this is less a reflection of his coaching and more a reflection of his roster building. Now, before we get into that, let's be clear. We're not doing the Belichick versus Brady thing. This current team is not a reflection of Belichick's roster building during the Brady era. In fact, that's precisely the problem. Think about it. Even at the back end of the dynasty, you had Rob Gronkowski, Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola, James White, all skilled offensive position players that Bill Belichick identified and brought into this team. Where is that currently? Bill Belichick has fallen off. He's fallen off as a GM. I don't doubt his ability to still coach, but he's missed significantly when it comes to adding offensive talent to this team. And what's worse is it doesn't stop at the skilled positions on offense. It actually starts with the offensive line. Let's look at how this year's offensive line was constructed. Going left to right, at left tackle, you have Trent Brown, an all-pro talent who's historically an inconsistent player. Cole Strange at left guard, who was supposed to improve going into his second season, but Sean McVay's assessment of Tennessee Chattanooga into the first round is starting to look a little bit more accurate. At center, you had David Andrews, who's a solid, reliable veteran player. At right guard, you have Mike Owenu, who's been good on a rookie contract and relatively stable at the position. At right tackle, you really didn't have an answer. You brought in Riley Reif to take that position, but he got beaten out at training camp by Sidy Sow, a rookie that was drafted in the 4th round. And he's now filling in at right guard due to some of the injuries on the offensive line, which speaks to some of the issues with depth. Your depth for your offensive line was Sidy Sow, who I mentioned before, drafted in the 4th round, Jake Andrews, who was also drafted in the 4th round and is a backup center/guard who we haven't really seen yet this year, and then Antonio Mafi, who is a backup guard drafted in the 5th round. Additionally, you signed Calvin Anderson as your swing tackle, but he hasn't really been able to break the lineup, and as a result of all the struggles at the tackle position, had to make a last-minute trade before the season for Vidarian Lowe, who you are now starting at right tackle and who's really struggled. So when you think about the offensive line that they entered the season with, the only places that they were really solid were center and right guard with David Andrews and then Mike Owenu. Other than that, you had some question marks with Cole Strange going into his 2nd season, the unreliable history of Trent Brown, and really no answer at right tackle. Additionally, you built your depth with a bunch of mid-round draft picks and some veteran free agent signings that just haven't panned out. So you went into the season with very little on the offensive line in terms of high-level talent or depth. And that's really starting to show with all the struggles that they've had across the first 5 weeks of the season. Combine that with the fact that you have a new offensive line coach in Adrian Clem, and you basically just had a recipe for disaster before the season even started. When it comes to the offensive skilled positions, we can start with this most recent offseason and work our way backwards. He chose to let his most productive receiver, Jacoby Myers, walk away in free agency and replace him with an apparently injured Juju Smith-Schuster, who he gave a similar contract to. He also then chose to move on from Jonnu Smith, sending him to Atlanta and bringing in Mike Gesicki. Now, I know Jonnu Smith was not a popular player among New England Patriots fans, as he had failed to really produce consistently in the passing game. However, he was a key to their run game and the blocking that he provided at the tight end position. You're now in a situation where the only tight end that you have that can really provide blocking in the run game and still become a threat in the passing game is Hunter Henry, which further compounds the issues that you have on the offensive line. Combine those free agent decisions with the decision in the draft to take 3 defensive players with your first 3 picks, and you've really set the offense up to fail. Don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled with the Christian Gonzalez pick. He looks like an absolute stud at cornerback, and it's unfortunate that we won't get to see him again this season due to the injury. But did you really need to go defense with your 2nd and 3rd round pick? And when you get to the 4th round, did you have to go with these offensive linemen instead of bringing in proven veteran talent at those positions? When it comes to the draft and the offensive skilled positions, this is where Belichick's fallen off the most from a roster building standpoint. Think about this stat. The last offensive skilled position player that the Patriots drafted and then gave a 2nd contract to was James White. He was drafted in 2014. That's 10 drafts ago. Now, you may say, well, has there really been enough time on some of the more recent drafts to see how it plays out? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe you're a Tyquan Thornton guy and you think he's going to break through. Maybe you're a Demario Douglas guy, and that's fine. But let's go the other way then. Let's go a little bit further back. The last guy before James White to get a 2nd contract, Rob Gronkowski, drafted in 2010. So I just gave you another 4 drafts of largely coming up empty for offensive skilled position players. Now, when you look at the more recent drafts, 2019 might have been the biggest mistake of all, when Bill decided to draft N'Keal Harry in the 1st round over A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, and DK Metcalf. All similar built big receivers who could have filled that need for the Patriots. Now, the roster building issues don't just stop with the offense. They extend to special teams and defense as well. And they drafted a kicker in the 4th round. He's 4 for 8 on field goal attempts this year. They also drafted a punter in the 6th round who's repeatedly had issues with shanks out of bounds. Both of those issues can also be attributed to the fact that their long snapper, who's one of the highest paid in the league, Joe Cardona, has been unable to consistently snap the ball in either situation. This also comes a year after they had to move on from a punter, Jake Bailey, who is a former All-Pro and who sits as a $2+ million dead cap hit on this year's cap sheet. And lastly, we need to talk about the defense. I heard all offseason about how great this Patriots defense was, and that carried into the beginning of this season. But the reality is, their greatness is really rooted in Bill Belichick's coaching, not his roster building. When you look at the roster and who they have on defense, there's really only 2 high-end, all-pro type caliber players. There's Matthew Judon, and then there's Christian Gonzalez, who we mentioned earlier as their 1st round pick this season. Both of those players are now hurt. We already know that Gonzo is going to miss the rest of the season and that Matthew Judon's out till probably at least December. And at that point, you have to wonder if it even makes sense for him to come back. So with both those players injured, you start looking around at the rest of the roster on defense, and there's really not that much there that really scares anyone. Yes, they have some good players, but who is their 3rd best player? Maybe it's Bentley, maybe it's Duggar, maybe it's Godchaux, maybe it's Peppers, John Jones. Take your pick. Either way, these are good NFL players. They're not high caliber, all-pro, Pro Bowl type talents. So that vaunted Patriots defense that everyone's referring to is really made up of a lot of good, solid, veteran NFL players mixed in with some great coaching from Bill Belichick. It'll be interesting to see how that defense holds up the rest of the season now that Christian Gonzalez and Matthew Judon are out of the picture. The bottom line, Bill Belichick's roster building just has not been good enough, and it's been in significant decline the last few seasons. It started before the end of the Brady era, and it's really carried in to these last few seasons, and the team's really starting to feel the brunt of it now. Okay, this brings me to point number 2, which is that Mac Jones is not the guy for this franchise moving forward. That starts with some things that we knew before he was even drafted. He has limited physical tools, he's not very athletic, and has one of the weakest arms in the league. Now, they were able to work around a lot of this with their system in 2021 when Mac was a rookie and Josh McDaniels was the offensive coordinator. That can't be outright dismissed or ignored. We do have to acknowledge the fact that the team is a mess, they can't block anyone, and the receivers aren't getting a ton of separation on their routes. However, there are a lot of things that are within Mac's control that he's simply not executing and not paying attention to detail on. For instance, not setting his feet on throws, not stepping into throws, trying to extend plays when he's simply incapable of doing so due to his limited athleticism, and most importantly, protecting the football. Look, if he goes out there, protects the football, makes the plays that are there to be made, and doesn't do anything more than that, I think everyone would accept that, even if that results in losses. The problem right now is Mac's actually the reason that they're losing games, because he's constantly turning the ball over and putting them behind very early in these games. A lot of times we talk about arm talent and velocity on throws as if they're the same thing. And the reality is there's a correlation between the two, but you don't have to have a supremely strong arm to generate velocity on throws as an NFL quarterback. Arm talent or arm strength allows somebody like a Justin Herbert or a Josh Allen to be able to roll all the way to their right and then throw back across the field to their left and still hit their target on time. It allows somebody like Patrick Mahomes to run around, evade defenders, jump into the air, and throw off platform and still get the ball to his receiver in time before a defender can close on it. However, if you lack the arm talent or the arm strength to make those plays like Mac Jones does, there's still a path towards playing quarterback in the NFL. And it requires you to play on time, on schedule, and really pay attention to your mechanics, which involves stepping into throws and really allowing your lower body to help you drive the ball down the field. Think of it like a golf swing or a baseball swing. A lot of the power that you derive is from the rotation of turning your body, turning your hips as you make contact. It's no different than throwing a football in that when you step into your throw and rotate your body to make the throw, you can get much more on the football. You're not just throwing with your arm. And this is where the problem with Mac Jones comes in. He's simply not playing the position like a professional. He seems to not care about his mechanics, or he's become so frazzled and distracted and unable to focus on what he needs to do once the ball is snapped that he's constantly throwing off his back foot or throwing flat-footed or trying to do the first thing that we talked about, such as rolling across the field one way and throwing back across the field the other way, which is something that he doesn't have the physical tools to do. You saw that in the Dallas game where he made that exact play to really start the downward spiral, where he rolled out to his right, stopped, finally decided to set his feet and step into a throw, and threw all the way back to the left across his body, which ended up getting picked off, returned for a touchdown. He then had a pick later in that game where it's 4th and 2. Yes, he needs to make a play, but he drops back. He's really not under much pressure, and he basically just throws the ball directly to the defender. I have no idea what he's looking at. As bad as those plays were, the turnover to start that game might have been even worse when he got chased down from behind trying to run away from a defensive end, got strip sacked, and that ball got returned for a touchdown because he was basically at his own 10-yard line. It just can't happen. And then he spent an entire week talking about how he needs to protect the football, he needs to not try to do too much, he needs to not try to do things that he's not capable of, and he didn't make it more than 6 plays in the New Orleans game without turning the ball over again when he threw another pick six. Now, some people will say, well, he was hit when he was throwing. Yes, he was hit when he was throwing, but that was after he chose not to get the ball out on time to an open Hunter Henry, and then decided to step up and climb the pocket and basically stepped into the pressure. That ball either needs to come out on time to Hunter Henry, or he needs to just take the sack, eat it, move on to the next play, move on to the next series, keep the score 0-0 at that point in the game. Later in the New Orleans game, he had perhaps the most careless play we've seen from him yet when he missed Ramondre Stevenson on a pitch on a 3rd and 1 from the Patriots 34. Look, you're the quarterback. When the ball leaves your hands, you need to know where it's going to go. And that wasn't even close. It was lazy. It was a careless play. And I think that's a good reflection of where we are with Mac Jones. His play is more indicative of a quarterback that's quit on his team than a quarterback that's committed to doing the things necessary to win. He later followed that up with his second interception of the game, an interception that a lot of people will say was really on Ty Montgomery. As the ball arrived, Montgomery didn't catch it clean, was hit as the ball got there, ball popped into the air and was picked off. But when you look at the replay of that, Mac Jones does not step into the throw. He throws flat-footed. He puts a lot of air under the ball unnecessarily and really floated it into Ty Montgomery. If he steps into that throw, puts some heat on it, takes advantage of the fact that he had space between Montgomery and the sidelines to lead him a little bit more, he could have got that ball on him much faster and given Montgomery more time to make that catch, whether he made it clean or not, before the defender was able to close on him and make the hit. So yes, would you like Montgomery to pull that ball in cleanly? Of course. It doesn't change the evaluation of the throw. The ball needs to get there faster, and the reason it didn't wasn't because Mac isn't strong enough to get it there. It was because he didn't step into the throw and put some heat on the ball. And that comes back to the mechanics, and it comes back to the laziness at which he's playing the position. All I'm asking for of Mac Jones is to play the position like a professional and be a leader for this team. What we've seen on the field is a lack of professionalism in how he's approached his craft and how he's executed in these games. And it's also carried off the field as well. When you look at his press conferences, how he carries himself, he's talking a lot about the offense needs to do this, the offense needs to do that. We rarely hear from him specifics of what he's taking accountability for and what he needs to do better. And going back to what I said earlier, yes, the situation sucks. The team's a dumpster fire, but he's pouring gasoline on it. Ultimately, I see a quarterback who doesn't want to be part of this team, doesn't want to be here, and is too busy pouting about his situation than focusing on the things he can control. Okay, so this brings me to my third point, which is that it's time to start thinking about next season. Yes, there are still 12 games left in the 2023 NFL season for the New England Patriots, and yes, everyone in that building in Foxborough, everyone on that roster, everyone on that coaching staff is going to have to work hard to figure out how they can compete in each of those 12 games because that's the task at hand and that's the job. But if we're being honest, this team is not making a playoff run and that record is not going to be very pretty at the end of the season. And that means you're going to have a high draft pick. How high remains to be seen. Now, in an ideal scenario, because the Patriots are already on this path, they end up with the number one pick in the draft. That would allow them to draft Caleb Williams, who's hailed as the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck. Now, if they don't end up at 1, but they end up at 2, they could draft Drake May, who's another highly touted quarterback prospect. Now, let's say you don't end up with the first or second pick, but you land in the 3 through 5 range. Honestly, at this point, it seems pretty unrealistic that their pick would be anywhere worse than number 5. So the first question, if you're in that spot, is there a third quarterback who emerges during the rest of the college football season and through the pre-draft process that you deem worthy of a top 5 pick? If there is, you absolutely take that player. If there's not, you take the best player available, and then you look at maybe a trade into the back end of the first round to grab your quarterback, or perhaps take a quarterback in the second round. But you have to draft a quarterback this offseason, and you have to start the plan with somebody else that's not Mac Jones. So now the next question is, who is making those draft picks? And where I am with this thing right now is that Bill Belichick cannot be allowed to continue to serve as the GM of the New England Patriots after the 2023 NFL season. Now, that gets complicated quickly because it's not as simple as just firing Bill Belichick. I still believe he's a really good NFL head coach, and I think Robert Kraft probably feels the same way and probably doesn't want to fire him. But I think he will go through his evaluation process, and I think he will reach a similar conclusion that the roster building with Belichick has been the biggest issue. Now, if Kraft goes to Belichick and says, we want you to stay on as head coach, but we want you to give up control of the roster, that's going to be an interesting conversation. Because the first question is Belichick going to go for it? Now, if he doesn't go for it and he says, nope, I'm not interested in that, It's very simple. It's a mutual parting. Both parties go their separate ways, and the Patriots start their reset with a new group in the front office and a new head coach. It gets more complicated if Belichick is actually open to it, because now the question becomes, who is that GM that you're bringing in? You're very limited from two perspectives now. One is, do you have to get Belichick's approval on who you bring in? So now you're working off the list of Belichick pre-approved GM candidates. The other is, let's say that's not the case. You have the reverse problem of you're going out into the candidate pool of potential NFL GMs and trying to get interviews with different guys. How many of those guys are going to want to take that job with the fear that they're going to have to bend a little bit to Belichick's influence in terms of what players he's looking for to be able to coach on his team? If you're in a position where you've worked your whole career to potentially have the opportunity to become a general manager in the NFL, you might only get one shot at that. In fact, you're probably only going to get one shot at that if it doesn't go well, if you're not successful. So with that being said, do you want to take your one shot in a situation where you feel like you might not be able to build the roster that you want to build? Probably not. You'd probably rather wait another year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, until you get the opportunity to do it your way, because you're only going to get one shot. And do you want to go down fighting, doing things your way, or do you want to go and take your shot where you didn't really get your shot because you didn't get to build the roster that you wanted to build? So now put those things up against each other. There's sort of this Venn diagram of candidates, of Belichick approved GM candidates and candidates interested in working with Belichick. And all of a sudden it gets very small very quickly. And that candidate pool probably starts to become people that are already in that building now, or people that have been in that building previously. And that's where this decision gets very difficult for Robert Kraft, because he has to decide if that's going to work. Is that going to be enough of a reset? Bill Belichick used the term start over after the loss to the New Orleans Saints, that this week they would start over with everything in terms of their preparation for the Las Vegas Raiders. And ironically, the solution for the Patriots might be that they need to start over organizationally after this season. And that might require a full reset. And that's going to be a difficult decision that Robert Kraft is going to have to make. Because if it is a full reset, the best path forward may be one that doesn't include Bill Belichick. No more trying to rebuild what was once there. It's time to build something new. That's it. That's all I got for today. I'll catch you on the flip side.